So you know from the entertainer music that it's time for a return to everyone's favorite topic, sexism in video games. So this is the 5th video in my series. I provocatively entitled it Damsels in Development, as an allusion to Feminist Frequency's damsels in distress trope. I'm going to take a look at a complaint that, as far as I know, almost nobody else has dared to address directly. And that complaint is that we game developers aren't doing enough to promote the inclusion and advancement of women within the game industry. It's a topic that I think deserves some investigation. Spoiler alert, the common narrative you see in the press that developers are working to exclude women can be shown to be false. And more so, that the promotion of that narrative is actually an obstacle against the inclusion of more women in game development. But before I get into that, I have a few quick notes. First, I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to comment and provide feedback on my other videos. I take some time out every day to read through those comments and even try to respond from time to time. Of course, there are just so many comments that I can't respond to everything, but I do appreciate what you guys have to say. Some of my ideas for future videos have come from those comments, and some of my viewpoints on things have changed in response to your insight and criticisms. So, thank you. In that vein, I also want to acknowledge a common complaint that my first videos sound very stilted. It's true. I actually kind of cringe at just how robotic I sound when I go back and listen to them now.
A few people in the comments section have said that my delivery is robotic. Perhaps it isn't the compliment it sounds like.
Interestingly, one of the most common complaints I've received is how I say this word. Someone was even kind enough to send me a handy-dandy pronunciation guide.
Ideology. Ideology.
You know, I hadn't ever really thought of it before, so I went and looked it up. Apparently, it is correct to say it both ways, but the version with the long I, ideology, is the more common. Although, there are some reasonably respectable folks who say it just like I do.
Biology is an ideology, and the idea of the objective world is an ideology, and science is an ideology, and it's all interpretation all the way down, like turtles all the way down.
So anyway, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll try to watch myself in the future so that maybe I'll sound a little less like an idiot. Next, in response to some suggestions, I've set up a Patreon page. The link is in the comments below. Right now, making videos is more of a hobby than a career for me. But if you like what you see and you'd like to support me, hey, I'd really appreciate it. Who knows, maybe I can even get some better equipment and maybe some voice lessons. Of course, I'm not making videos only about games. I've also got some other topics that interest me as well, like behind the scenes of game development, the rise of machine intelligence, religion, philosophy, and so on. So please check out some of those other topics if they're of interest to you. Finally, a few people have asked what I'm doing now in the wake of the cancellation of Disney Infinity. Well, as some of you may have noticed, the Avalanche studio which made Infinity has been reborn and is now working for Warner Brothers. I was offered an opportunity to join them, but I decided that for now, I want to continue my sabbatical from making games so that I can continue to speak my mind freely. I know that if I ever went back to working for a big game development company, the PR team probably wouldn't want me provoking any controversy. Speaking of which, let me get back on topic and talk about damsels in development. You may have noticed that a common criticism leveled against game developers these days is that we're overwhelmingly male and white, and that we are threatened by the arrival of minorities and women into our industry. Here's just a smattering of some articles about that topic. Now, as I said in my previous video about Gamergate, I'm a critic of what I call the religion of identity politics. I don't think that it helps anyone of any race or gender to be reduced to their demographic markers and then told that, simply because of their birth characteristics, they fall into a category of being a majority or a minority, and hence into being either automatically the oppressor or the oppressed. Rather, I agree with Martin Luther King Jr., who said that we should be working towards a day when people are valued based on their behavior and the content of their character rather than on the color of their skin or, by extension I would say, the shape of their genitals. But, in the interest of furthering the discussion, let's go ahead and look at how some members of the press are reporting on the demographic numbers in game development and see how well they hold up under a bit of scrutiny. To me, this article is a pretty good example of the sorts of things that are being said. It's from a European website called Unite IT or Unite It, and originally published on February 28, 2016. It is titled, "Why Are There So Few Female Game Developers?" It starts like this. While the video games industry continues to grow and more women are playing games, the number of female developers is still low, and efforts to diversify the male-dominated industry have been the target of widely online harassment. What is going on? Why are women not attracted to a career as a game developer? And why are female gamers or developers a target for online harassment? So, right from the very start, we get a nice crystallization of the standard gaming press narrative. You'll see these same points repeated again and again in other articles. First, that gaming is growing and more women are playing games, which is true. But then second, that the male-dominated industry is somehow actively resisting allowing more women into game development. In fact, so goes the narrative, many of the women who do try to break in are so unwelcome that they can be harassed right back out. The rest of the article is aimed at reinforcing this narrative. But is it really the case? Let's take a closer look. As you come down a little further in the article, you'll see this common claim, that female gamers are even more populous than male gamers now. In fact, at first glance, the article makes it look like there are twice as many of them. But then if you look just a little closer, you'll see that something funny is going on with the reporting. For some mysterious reason, the author has decided to compare all women playing games who are over the age of 18 against just the young men who are under the age of 18. Take a moment to think about how weird it is to compare those particular demographics. First of all, the total population of women over the age of 18 is many times larger than the total population of men under the age of 18. According to the 2015 U.S. Census data, there are about 35 million young men under the age of 18, and that includes toddlers and infants. Meanwhile, there are over 122 million women over the age of 18. So the natural ratio before we consider gaming at all is already about 3.5 to 1, which means that even if 100% of the young men in the smaller demographic, including those in diapers, were playing games, they would still be outnumbered if only about 1 in 3 of the adult women were also playing. Why not compare the number of adult women within a certain age range playing games against, I don't know, the number of adult men in that same range? Wouldn't that be a more fair apples to apples comparison? It looks to me that the author could have done so from the sentence immediately above. The ratio appears to be 4 to 3 men to women for gaming over the age of 18. Why not report these numbers? Is there perhaps an ideological, I said it right this time, agenda here? Okay, so that's weird, but let's move on. Next, we have this chart, which is based on an IGDA survey of developers and subject to all the problems that surveys might have. According to this survey, about 3 out of 4 game developers are male. Now, if you're pushing an agenda and look only at the misleading 2 to 1 women to boy statistic, and then at this 3 out of 4 developers are male chart, you might see it as problematic and definitive proof that women are being deliberately excluded from development. But if we look a little closer at the numbers and put them into a relevant context, they tell a different story. You see, 10 years earlier, the IGDA ran a similar survey, and at that time only 11% of the developers that responded identified as female. This means that, in just a decade, the percentage of women working in game development has doubled. And this has happened during a period of tremendous growth as millions of more women have shown an interest in gaming and thousands of development jobs have been created. Now, if the percentages had stayed about the same during this growth period, you might be able to make the case that the industry wasn't responding to the influx of female gamers. But the percentage of female developers has outpaced the growth of the industry by a factor of 2. So this isn't evidence of women being excluded, it's evidence of the exact opposite. In the past 10 years, the industry is actually welcoming female developers at a rate that is so good that it is growing at twice the speed as is the industry as a whole. After this, the author does something that I consider to be a bit underhanded in pursuit of her women are being kept out narrative. Remember, she just used numbers from the survey in 2014. But now, without telling you, she goes back to use the old numbers from the 2004 survey for the very next chart. Which means, of course, that all the percentages she shows you here do not reflect that doubling of growth that we know took place. If you're not meticulously careful and check your footnotes, you'll think that these numbers reflect the state of the industry as it is today. But of course, they don't. They're outdated and don't represent that doubling of female developers or anywhere near where things actually stand now. But the article sticks with the 2004 numbers anyway. Again, why would you do this if you're not trying to push an agenda? Finally, the article goes here. Above evidence shows that efforts to make the gaming industry an inclusive, fair place to work has fallen short, and that many female game developers feel uncomfortable or unwelcome in a place that should feel safe and encouraging. Blatant sexual harassment and marginalization on the work floor may prompt female game developers to go independent and work as a freelance developer or not enter the industry at all. And then she goes off into Gamergate land and uses a scary picture of Zoe Quinn as proof of something. Anyway, I already covered the Gamergate topic in a previous video, so I won't rehash it here. What I will say is that this particular article is not atypical. You'll see these same narrative points repeated again and again in article after article. As someone who has both looked at the evidence and who has actually worked as a developer for over 2 decades, this version of events is completely backwards from reality. What I've experienced is that the game industry is falling all over itself to include more women and to be more welcoming to both female gamers and to female developers. Again, not because it is being pushed into it by some sort of social justice ideology, but because it is just smart business. Game developers want to serve these growing markets. So now, allow me to shift gears and give you a few personal experiences that I've had with this topic of women in game development. Now, note these are just anecdotes, not actual analyses, but hopefully you'll still find them interesting and relevant. When Disney bought Avalanche back in 2005, one of the first things they did was subject the management team of our studio to something called diversity training. Now, to its credit, the Walt Disney Company has tried to work towards being an open and progressive workplace. For the most part, they aim to hire people based on their skills and talents, irrespective of their race or gender. But as I sat through this diversity training program, I started to get this sense that sometimes our instructors were pushing an agenda that, in the interest of sensitivity, some individuals needed to be treated differently, as special. So, as I was stewing on this, our diversity instructors told this story. When Gerber started selling baby food in Africa, they used the same packaging as in the US, with the beautiful Caucasian baby on the label. Later, they learned that in Africa, companies routinely put pictures on the label of what's inside, since most people can't read. African consumers took one look at the product, however, and were horrified. They interpreted the labels to mean that the jars contained ground-up babies. Of course, everyone laughed, and then our instructors told us that it just goes to show how important it is to really understand people of other cultures, that they may not know or understand the same things that we do. But I took quite a different message from the story. To me, it seemed to be saying that African people are too stupid to know that people don't sell, much less eat, ground-up babies. In the interest of supposedly improving sensitivity, The story was actually sending a message that some people are just so damned ignorant about the world that we need to treat them like idiots. Furthermore, I wondered if the story was even true. So on a break, I went and looked it up on Snopes. Sure enough, it proved to be an urban legend. Armed with this knowledge, I went back and politely and privately told our instructors that the Gerber baby story never actually happened, and that by telling it, they might be sending kind of a negative message about the fine people of Africa. Now, I thought that they might appreciate what I had to say, but I was wrong. Instead, they told me that challenging them on their story meant that I was a fighter against diversity in the workplace, and that they were going to mark that down in my HR file, which to this day I still think is a pretty strange response. Now at that time, I decided to just let things drop and didn't pursue it any further. But a light bulb went off in my head. I started to think that maybe sometimes when one so-called privileged group is advocating for special treatment of another group in the interest of promoting diversity, they are actually saying that the underprivileged group simply isn't smart enough or good enough to make it on their own merits. I started to think that maybe it is potentially even more harmful to minorities to treat them as requiring some kind of special handicap than it is simply to treat them as equals who are just as smart and just as capable as anyone else. Questions started to spring to mind like, shouldn't we be evaluating people based on their merits and their contributions rather than on their race or gender? Isn't this coddling of minority groups sending a message that they are somehow inferior? And isn't it far more racist and sexist to promote or hire someone based on their skin color or their genital composition than it is to simply ignore those things and just hire the best person for the job? Speaking of hiring practices, on more than one occasion I've been in a position where I've been asked by the human resource team to evaluate candidates for an open position. Something you may not know about the hiring process is that sometimes in the first round of candidate review, the HR team will mask out any potential demographic identifier such as age, sex, or even a name. That way, we are looking only at the pertinent qualifications themselves. We are kept deliberately blind from any other information. Quite often it turned out that, after doing this first round of review, we discovered that all of our qualified candidates just happened to be male. Furthermore, sometimes we'd learn that no women even applied for an open position. Which brings to mind another question. How can you hire more women when they don't even apply? And are press articles about how allegedly hostile the game industry is to women maybe driving qualified candidates away? Is it possible that these third-wave gender feminists who are complaining mightily about alleged harassment and misogyny in the industry are actually scaring women away and making things worse? All right, so here's another story from my experience. About a dozen years ago at Avalanche, we brought in a group of art interns for some temporary work. One of those interns, an Asian American woman, was fresh out of college. Let's call her Kay. And she worked with us for a few months doing mostly texture painting for backgrounds and models and that sort of thing. At the end of her internship, we recognized Kay as a standout from among her peers. So we offered her a full-time position, which she accepted. Shortly thereafter, we discovered that Kay was not only a good artist, but that she also had a knack for organizing and tracking assets and information. So about a year later, we asked her if she might be interested in a promotion to an associate producer position where she could still do some art, but would also help tracking and managing the work of some of her fellow artists. She graciously accepted that too. As the years went by, this pattern continued. Everything we asked Kay to do, she excelled at. And every time a promotion came up, she was at the top of our list. Year over year, Kay took on more responsibilities and climbed the ranks. Some nights when I was late at the office, I would take a look at the office instant messenger and note that she was also still there, working hard and kicking ass. She was smart, she was personable, she was efficient, and she excelled at her job. We often said, we need more people like Kay working here. Well, after about 10 years, Kay told us that she was quitting. We were all flabbergasted by this. Why, we asked. Well, she said, I want you to know that I've loved working here and that you guys have treated me better than I ever expected. I've been paid and promoted well, and I love everything about working here except for one thing: the hours that doing my job requires of me. I want to have a life outside of work. I want to spend more time with my friends and my family, and well, I just don't see how I can do that and still be successful here. As an upper management team, we tried to talk Kay out of leaving because she was just that good. We really, really didn't want to lose her. But both we and she knew that working in games can be a very demanding job. So she gave us a few months, and then she left to go pursue other things anyway. Losing her really hurt, and we all grieved over that loss. Now, Kay's story reflects something that I've personally seen happen many times in the games industry, and that is burnout. And although it impacts both men and women, I think it seems to impact women more because they tend to value their life outside of work more. I've seen many young women get hired in and then, after some time of doing some amazing and excellent work, they decide that they've had enough and then leave to go pursue something that isn't quite so demanding upon their time. Maybe they want to have children, or they want to spend more time with family, or maybe they just want to actually start having weekends off again. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but when I see numbers reflecting that the industry is dominated by men and that most of the more senior positions are made up of men, I can't help but wonder how much the all-consuming nature of game development figures into that. So one final word of advice here. Irrespective of your race or gender, if you want to get into game development and approach things with an attitude of, I'm going to succeed based primarily on the merits of my skills and my work ethic, I think you'll do just fine. And I think you'll discover that the game industry will welcome you with open arms. But on the other hand, if you come into the game industry with an attitude of, I'm a special snowflake because of my alleged minority status, so everyone else needs to treat me as something rare and precious, well, you might be in for a much-deserved rude awakening. Remember, the game industry craves creativity, not crybabies. All right, that's it. So until next time, game on, my friends.